Okay, everybody. Welcome to your first Getting Started PowerPoint presentation. We're going to look at some definitions that figure within our topic this semester, and while we won't be able to define these words precisely, we will get a sense of the loaded and occasionally complicated concept. For example, in this second slide, you see a series of terms that obviously relate to our topic. But what do these terms actually mean? My hope with this presentation is to show you how these terms that we'll use can be defined, but they actually represent problems as well. So we will spend a few minutes looking at the terms important to our topic this semester: environment, nature, culture, wilderness, civilization, conservation, preservation, and paradise. You'll see that I've opposed some of these words in order to create oppositions that might be useful to this effort. Each of these words has a story behind it that helps to explain its meaning in terms that will help us understand them in the literature that explores them in fuller terms. To explore the story behind each of these words, I've taken some definitions from the Oxford English Dictionary, which is considered the authoritative dictionary in the English language, and some words of explanation from other sources as well. The OED provides not only definitions but examples of a word's usage throughout its history. To that end, each entry from the OED tells not only what a word means but the story behind it, where it comes from, and how its meanings might have changed over time. Well, I certainly don't expect you to read over each slide in detail. I do hope that you'll take a few minutes to pause and scan each slide to see how these definitions and etymologies, that is, the word histories, from the OED provide useful ideas to associate with these words. Do feel free to pause and take a break if you need to, and also feel free to stop and look at each slide more fully if you feel the effort will be helpful. Although our topic is American environmental literature and begins roughly about the year 1840, it is first important to establish a central premise for the class, that environmental writing really has no history. We see the concerns of the environmentalists called many different things and fitting within different historical periods throughout history, but writers have always sought to engage and express interest and an occasional concern about the world around them. As indicated on the slide, writers throughout history have considered the relations between humans and the non-human, or humans and nature, in both practical and spiritual dimensions. For example, when we talk about the word environment, we can see that it is related to concepts of surrounding, enclosing, or encompassing. The word generally deals with the conditions that exist within a given space and around it. You can see this from the first three definitions on the slide. If you'd like to pause and scan this material, you are most welcome to, but for our purposes, the fourth definition, which I've highlighted in red, refers to the social, political, or cultural circumstances that a being lives within. Fairly basic so far. But when we look at the term nature, we see that the word has a lot of different spellings throughout history, comes from English and French origins, and is derived ultimately from Latin. For example, in the case by the work by Lucretius, De Rerum Natura, of natural things. I've summarized some senses from the OED to indicate that the term nature refers to one's physical power, substance, mental makeup, or as shown in the last definition, one's innate character. When we look at some examples of the word's use in English, we can find ourselves going back to the 14th century, where the term implied a sense of balance or order or perhaps harmony. When something was true to its nature, had achieved a sort of balance or harmony. So you can see that this is a complicated word, And when we talk about nature, we are talking about something that both adheres to our sense of balance and order, but also something that grows and generates according to its own logic and principles, or its own nature. And I've included some definitions from the English poet Chaucer, and the other English poets Milton and Dryden, who came some years later, just to show how the term had such an important function in medieval and Renaissance literature. When we think about what opposes the idea of nature, that sense of natural balance and harmony, we have the idea of culture and all of the senses of the word: cult, cultivation, cultured, etc. And as the purpled highlighting indicates, the OED refers to this state as a developed condition, either through social, artistic, or educational conditions, which lead to a state of higher separation or refinement. You'll see also in the green that the word culture and cultivation has a sense of working the land as well, cultivating it. Therefore, the condition of culture represents an improvement of nature as something that is refined, developed, socialized, or otherwise brought to a state beyond nature, something that is cultured or cultivated. When we think about the word wilderness, we have another definition that really is a problem. I've included a couple of quotes here from the well-known wilderness writers Roderick Nash and William Cronon. If we pause for a moment and read through these passages, which you are encouraged to do, we see that wilderness is not only an idea that is difficult to define, but also a reflection of human thoughts and values. And we see this in particular with the quote from Cronon right here in the middle: "Wilderness hides its unnaturalness behind a mask that is all the more beguiling because it seems so natural." So that is a loaded term, and we can also go back to the history of the word. Some of you are familiar with the Old English poem Beowulf, in which we find the first use of the term wilderness in the English language. I've included a passage from the Old English version here and a translation of that passage here. Please take a moment to review if you'd like to look at the translation. You can see that in the senses used here, wilderness is that place where things are wild. It is therefore a place that is threatening to what is cultured, what is of humankind. Wilderness is a home to monsters, beasts, and other wild creatures, the wilderness. The idea comes to assume a fairly significant importance in cultural history and factors heavily into our ideas about both nature and culture. What is not the wilderness, therefore, exists in the realm of civilization. Obviously, this word has Latin origins and refers to the development of communities, governments, and structures which dictate how human beings interact. Rules that dictate how people interact in one civilization might contrast significantly from those in another. So in that case, we just see distinct cultures or civilizations. Moreover, we can see how the concept of civilization differs from the idea of nature, and from a couple of other words that we need to define: conservation and preservation. Conservation and preservation are words that we are inclined to use interchangeably, but they actually refer to different practices. I've taken a couple of definitions here from the Encyclopedia of the Atmospheric Environment to show this difference. Here in red you can see that the conservationist believes that although resources can be used, they are not to be consumed faster than they can be replaced. They are maintained for future generations as well as for the present. However, you can see from the last sentence that the conservationist recognizes that resources are to be used, but used in ways that do not lead to their depletion or to their waste. that would leave in ways that would leave humankind worse for wear. So the concept of conservation contrasts with the idea of preservation. The preservationist adheres to a more equal relationship with the earth, believing that humans are not the center of the universe and nature, or the balance of life, has a value of its own. Therefore, the preservationist holds that humans should leave certain natural spaces untouched because they have their own innate values. That brings us to the very loaded idea of paradise. From this slide, you can see that the idea of paradise has a very long history. Please feel free to stop and scan over the OED definition, which shows how many societies have held to the concept of paradise throughout history. And here I've highlighted some portions of the definition in green and others in blue, which represent two key aspects of paradise. The sections in green refer to Eden, or a walled plot, or a park, basically a garden, an enclosed space where things grow. The blue sections, which refer to religious conceits like heaven, or the abode of the blessed, or a place where souls await resurrection, also represents a key aspect of paradise. So, when we combine aspects of the enclosed garden with the idea of heaven, we notice that paradise is something that is enclosed or surrounded, but also represents a sort of intermediary space, neither a celestial heaven entirely, nor an earthly garden, but something in between. Paradise is both grounded in reality, therefore, but also an abstraction, something that exists in both this world and in a more perfect world. So, we might not have defined anything precisely here, but we can see some useful oppositions forming in what we've reviewed. We notice here a trend in which what is natural and wild is opposed to what is civilized, beneficial, and useful to humankind. We also see distinctions between human and non-human influence. We see that nature is something that humans touch, improve, adapt, and modify, or something that is left alone, seen to hold impenetrable mysteries, and is regarded from afar. And we see differences between what is known and understood versus what is unknown and mysterious. Finally, we see a distance between what we connect with a concrete present, or what exists in the here and now, versus what exists in the distant past or in a mythic realm. This concludes this initial slide presentation, which is probably the longest one you will be asked to watch this semester. Not every presentation will be this long, but it is important to understand the complexities associated with words that figure crucially in this class. And in the next narrated PowerPoint presentation, we will explore, more briefly, the implications of some of these words in light of the larger topic before us. Thank you for listening.